Hi, and welcome to my video explaining the creativity game, Trigger Tower. In this video, I'm going to explain 3 different versions on how you can play this game. You've got the solo version, which is for 1 player, you've got the dual version, which is for 2 players, and you've got the Tower Master version, which is for 3 or more players. Like all games in the quomode family, the strategies and techniques needed to play and win this game are actual strategies and techniques useful for real-world creative projects. This game is played on our special creativity deck. What makes this deck different from a normal deck of cards is that on each card is an action, or what we call a trigger, and you simply apply this trigger to whatever idea you are working with. So the basic nature of this game is to draw a trigger, apply this trigger to your idea, and then perform, draw, or explain the resulting developed idea. For more information about our creativity deck, the research behind it, and for other creative games and strategies, please check out our website at www.quomode.com. Start by selecting an initial idea. This idea doesn't have to be very creative. In fact, it doesn't even have to be original. All you need is something on which to apply your triggers. So choose anything. Next, make sure the cards are well shuffled. Then, on the table in front of you, I want you to lay 3 cards face up and 1 card face down. From these 4 cards on the table, you're going to select 2 and discard the others. Now, you can select from the 3 that you can see, or you can select the card that's face down. But know that if you do that, you're committing to that trigger without actually knowing what it is. Place the triggers that you've selected face up in your trigger tower. Now that you can see what triggers are in your tower, you can actually evaluate the strength of your tower. So ask yourself this question: can I interpret my initial idea through the triggers currently in my tower? If the answer is maybe or no, then stop and give it your best shot. Because remember, the point of this game is to practice your creative techniques. If, on the other hand, your answer is a resounding, yeah, that's really simple, then deal yourself out more cards. Keep adding to the tower until you get to the point where you're no longer sure if you're capable of interpreting your initial idea using all of the triggers in your tower. To deal yourself more cards, simply place 1 face up and 1 face down in front of you. From these 2 cards, you're going to select 1. So again, you can either select the one you can see or commit to the one you cannot see. Discard the other. Once you've selected your new trigger, add that to the tower face up. Once you've decided that your tower is complete, and we recommend between 3 and 5 at least to start with, go ahead and perform your initial idea, interpreting it through every single trigger in your tower. And that's how you play the solo version of Trigger Tower. This is the 2-player version of Trigger Tower. Now, the rules are slightly different from the solo version because instead of challenging yourself, you're challenging your player. And the way to win the game is to be the last person who successfully interprets the initial idea through all the triggers laid out in the Trigger Tower. Start by selecting an initial idea. Once again, this idea doesn't have to be creative, and it doesn't even have to be original. But what it does have to be is something that both you and your opponent are comfortable interpreting. You don't even have to interpret it in the same way. So if you were, say, a musician and your opponent was a writer, you could interpret the music part and they could interpret the lyrics part, because the goal is to successfully apply the triggers to the idea, not necessarily do exactly what your opponent has done, but just better. Then shuffle the cards. This time you're going to deal out 5 cards to each player face down. Then, on the table in front of you, you're going to once again deal out 3 cards face up and 1 card face down. Now it's time to build the trigger tower. We're going to start with 3 cards, and this is how we're going to select them. First, your opponent is going to select the first card from the 4 on the table. That is, again, 3 that they can see and 1 that they cannot. They're going to take that and place it in the trigger tower. Then you are going to select the second card in the tower from the cards remaining on the table. Once again, you can select from the cards that you can see, or you're going to commit to the card that you can't see. Once you've made your selection, discard the rest. Place your card face up in the trigger tower. The trigger tower now has 2 cards. So to add the third card, you, as the dealer, are going to select one from your hand. You're going to look at the cards in your hand, and you're basically going to issue your first challenge. So select a card, place it face up in the tower, and then bring the number of cards in your hand back up to 5 by drawing from the deck. The trigger tower now has 3 cards, and it's up to your opponent now to start playing by performing the initial idea through the triggers in that tower.
I met him once, Carlo, in '55. Moscow Center was in pieces.
Once your opponent has performed their idea using all the triggers in the tower, and you both agree that the performance was successful, it is now up to your opponent to challenge you. So they are going to once again look at the triggers in their hand, and they're going to choose one with which to challenge you. They're going to place that face up in the tower and draw from the deck to bring the number of cards in their hands back up to 5. And so play continues. You perform, you evaluate, and you challenge, and then you make sure you have 5 cards in your hand. The last person to successfully perform the idea using all the triggers in the trigger tower is the winner. And that's how you play the dual version of Trigger Tower. This is the Tower Master version of Trigger Tower, and it's for 3 or more players. Now, it's going to be very similar to the dual version, except the initial startup to get those first 3 triggers in your Trigger Tower are going to be slightly different. Start the game by selecting an initial idea. Once again, it doesn't have to be creative, and it doesn't even have to be original. It just has to be something that every player around the table would be comfortable interpreting. Then shuffle the cards. The dealer will then deal out 5 cards face down to every player at the table, including himself. Once that's complete, the dealer will then once again place 3 cards face up and 1 card face down in the middle of the table. Player 1 is going to select 2 cards from the 4 cards that have been placed on the table. Once again, they can select from the cards that are face up, or they can commit to the card that is face down without actually knowing it. Once the player has made their selection, discard the other 2 and place that selection face up in the trigger tower. To start play, the trigger tower needs to have 3 cards. So the dealer will look into their hand and issue the first challenge. They're basically going to select a card from their hand, place it face up in the trigger tower, and then draw from the deck to bring the number of cards in their hand back up to 5. Now it's up to player 1 to perform that initial idea through the 3 starting triggers in the tower. Once player 1 has successfully done that, successfully performed the idea using all the triggers in the tower, they now get to issue their own challenge to player 2. And they do this, once again, by looking in their hands, selecting a trigger, and placing that face up in the tower as a challenge. And so this sequence, this perform, evaluate, challenge, and replenish the hand back up to 5, will continue to happen for each player until there's only one person standing, and they are deemed the Tower Master. And that's how you play the Tower Master version of Trigger Tower.